The Doomslayer is the most powerful being in all of gaming, of all time for that matter. While it may have not always seemed that way before the modern series, that idea was still there, as the Doom Marine overcame threats that no other could. But how does a mortal possess such power? Well, once a mortal, and now a godlike being, the Doomslayer and his power hold great mysteries. Besides being an excuse to let us do insane things, this power is a huge part of the series' identity. The Dark Ages further illustrated his potential, as its narrative takes place at a time surrounding his submission to the Divinity Machine, a holy device that is known to have imbued the Slayer with his incalculable celestial might. However, the Dark Ages, as it is a prequel, appears to have a much weaker Slayer than people are used to seeing. While the gameplay makes us feel like an absolute powerhouse, completely invincible, and true to that Iron Tank philosophy, there are a few story moments that might make the Slayer seem otherwise. He is shown to be faltered and susceptible to injury on multiple occasions, very uncommon for the character we've grown to know. Because of this, there seems to be a fair percentage of players who take this to imply that this is due to the idea that the Slayer has not yet been blessed with his divine power during this time. It's not uncommon that I will see people around the community claim that the Dark Ages shows a Slayer without his divine power, and that he is still a mere mortal. I'll go and say props to you for trying to piece together specific story elements and clues related to the nature of his power, but this idea is simply not the case. The Divinity Machine granted the Slayer access to his known abilities, and much of this game is a test of their limits. In this episode, I will cover the origin and power of the Divinity Machine, along with its importance and tie-in to the story of the Dark Ages. To fully understand the Divinity Machine and its capabilities, it is important to know how it came to be, and it's quite deep. While it was long hinted to be powered by the essence of the Father, the progenitor of the Makers, the biblical God, later releases would reveal other hidden truths. Stemming all the way back to much earlier ages of creation, the Divinity Machine is a concept lost to time. It all begins with the story of the Father and Devoth, the Dark Lord of Hell and the biblical devil of the Doom universe, who turned out to be the true first being, the Creator. In the dawn of time, Devoth was the leader and primeval of the realm of Jakad, which eventually became Hell. He was responsible for breathing the first life and creating the known universe, but he still longed to solve the secret of immortality, to provide it for the denizens of that first realm, his realm. He created Urdak, the Makers, and the Father to do so. After their complex minds achieved their creator's goal, the Makers found the knowledge of immortality too dangerous to share, as its existence under Devoth's rule challenged all of creation. Fearing any threats to existence, they sealed Devoth, along with his realm, away. Long story short, the Father eventually overpowered his creator as he took his power and status. However, the Father was reluctant to destroy him, for he held sentimentality to his creator. With the help of Samur Maker, his right hand, the new God placed Devoth's life sphere atop the Inmore Sanctum, while also storing away a shard of his essence. The angels in the heavens would be above all other realms. As the ages passed, Devoth's anger rose exponentially. His own creation, who he gifted life to, his servant, betrayed him, stealing his power and title from him, rewriting history. Devoth swore his vengeance, as he would slowly but surely serve the rest of his days with a new ambition to destroy his treacherous creation. Who knew that a leader loving his people too much would result in a grand butterfly effect spanning throughout creation?
You feel you are prepared now for this.
During the time of grief for the Argenta, the Makers presented themselves as the definitive answer to their problems. With their all-knowing and divine intellect, the Makers bestowed upon the Argenta new gifts and a promise to eternal paradise, in exchange for their prayers, much different than the fear they've been accustomed to from their previous deities. The Makers would even become intertwined with the Sentinel government. As generations passed, Devoth's grand plan was nearing its inception. The Makers' endless god mind, something traced back to and even utilized by the Father, was the knowledge of every potential future in any possible timeline. Devoth, while merely a presence across the cosmos, was still a god and held a great influence from his ever-growing connection to Hell. He took control of this Maker god mind and manipulated it to his will. He reached the Khan Maker, and through Devil's influence, led the Makers astray. Corrupting the mind of his betrayers, the seeds of destruction were planted. The god mind told the Makers that no matter what timeline, which possibility, their prosperity would be threatened by the rise of the Destroyer. So ironically, this prophesized beast would end the Maker race. The Khan Maker took this as a gesture from a higher power. Perhaps it was the Father, as his spirit rests in the Luminarium and provides divine guidance to Urdak? She was led to a location in Urdak in the mountains of Inkramon, where the father hid the shard of Devoth's essence. She was unaware of the true nature of this power source, but fearing the end of her rule along with creation, the Khan would be manipulated into forming the Divinity Machine through specific instruction. The paranoid Khan maker set out to find this hidden threat, as he would be of Argenta blood. The Khan spoke only of partial truths, that there was an impure being among them that must be cleansed. Out of their blind trust, the Sentinel set out to find the malicious one. As a subconscious threat from the makers, the promise of paradise after death would be lost because of the actions and impure nature of this abomination. Generations passed while the Khan, as only she would determine when the destroyer was found, would conduct several tests on the most vigorous warriors. These trials were administered using the Divinity Machine, constructed in the Chapel of Purity, located in the Argenta city of Terras Nabad. But the Khan maker couldn't just examine everyone. She had to be selective, limiting the use of the machine, as it would cause great harm to the unfortunate Sentinel who ended up inside. But as the ages passed, the machine was eventually left untouched, as no discoveries were made. But this would change during the eventual reign of King Novik. When plotting his revenge, Devoth was unaware of exactly who this destroyer would be and when they would enter existence. But he did know, perhaps someday, when the time was right, only a specific type of being would eventually cross paths with the Makers and the Sentinels. The Outlander from unknown origins, the Doom Guy, found himself in the outskirts of Sentinel Prime. Similar to other prisoners, he would be taken to the Blood Arena to prove himself. The stranger would spark the interest of many, including the Makers, as his ferocity was unseen before. He brought knowledge of the demons, introducing both the Makers and the Argenta to Hell, a new threat that would soon devastate this world. After his victory in the Blood Arena, he was gifted the honor of fighting in the front lines for the Sentinel army. Instead of rotting in prison or being put to work as a slave, the prisoners would be forced to fight, to die for a purpose, having no rank of importance. But eventually, Hell followed. Upon their first invasion of Argent Denor, they soon faced the wrath of the Marine once again. He was the only one to truly stand a fighting chance against the demons. Because of this, King Novik deemed this Outlander, this prisoner, worthy of joining the Sentinel ranks. The Outlander surpassed Sentinel code, as it was against tradition for prisoners to take on the Creed. He would fight for this holy army of the Makers. As he was a grand asset against this new enemy, he was the only one familiar with the demons, the only one that knows how to deal with what they're up against. The discovery of the Destroyer was still unknown, but the Khan did raise an eyebrow to the discovery of this stranger and his intense will. It was when Hell's soon invasion in Terras Nabad that Samar Maker, the father's loyal assistant and chancellor to the Khan, fell victim to Devoth's next step in his grand plan. On the eve of the Black Star, Samar would foresee the horrors of the near future, that the Khan Maker would grow reckless and lead them to peril. Like with the Khan, the seed of doubt was planted, and the Seraphim was led by the devil's influence. Devoth played both sides of the same prophecy. Samar must stop the Khan and her sinful future, as she would shatter what the Father had granted them. Through a supposed divine intervention, he foresaw that the Outlander, who he first recognized the appearance of upon his arrival, was not the enemy, but their savior. Samar's vision told him to use the very machine used to discover the Destroyer, to instead bless him with its contents, as it was previously thought by the Makers to have power of divine origin. He discovered the machine's true purpose of usage that was hidden from the Makers. As the battle grew and the city was nearing its loss, the Seraphim hurried the stranger to the chapel. He began a ritual that only he himself had knowledge of, while the stranger entered the chamber with the glowing symbol of the devil himself.
And now, they will fear you.
Samar had reversed the polarity of the machine, and the mortal was injected with the unholy essence. After overcoming devastating and ungodly sensations, the Doomslayer was born. As he rose from the ashes of the destroyed machine and saved the city, the Sentinels realized the true prophecy. This wasn't the malicious one they were warned about. This was their new hero, the answer that they prayed for during this time of need. He would become a legend written about throughout the rest of Argenta history, while his symbol, the one from the machine, became one of hope and certainty that they will be protected throughout this war. The Seraphim knew the result of his actions as he fled from Urdak as the new threat rose, but the Slayer would still save them all from the Khan. Meanwhile, Devoth had succeeded in forging his greatest creation, his monster. The Khan Maker, outraged by the deceit of her servant, took this credit and acted as if this was intended, to reassure the Argenta and to obtain control. From the Sentinels' perspective, the Makers deemed the prophesized one worthy as a vessel for their divine will, to cleanse the demonic influence. But in reality, the Makers feared him too. His new celestial power was unseen. His strength now matched his will, never ending and ever growing. He became a god. This is where the Dark Ages takes place. Before the Argenta got to understand their new hero, the Slayer was taken from them. The Makers imprisoned the Slayer, cleansing his mind to only focus on his hatred. They put him under a Maker tethering system, a leash to control and use him as a weapon. He would only serve as the nuclear option, as his containment was not definite. Samur's foresight would soon be proven true, as the Khan would form an unholy union, forbidden even by the Father. Because Devoth had one final step. The Dark Lord would form this union along with the other higher-ups of Hell, perhaps as a means to spark that hatred that the Slayer would have for the Makers. The Angels of Deceit would begin harvesting Argent energy, something that the Slayer would never allow. Once this union was sealed, the Dark Lord could now let nature take its course, and his work was mostly done. It was only the Doomslayer who was worthy of possessing the essence within the machine. The holy rituals conducted on the Sentinels would eventually destroy the mind and soul of its test subject, rendering them insane. The power of the devil would eradicate all. Even during the Argenta Civil War, the machine was reconstructed and repurposed to resurrect those who sided with the Makers as the corrupted marauders, fueled by a minute amount of the Dark Lord's essence that remained within. This is why they were the only enemy to stand a fighting chance as an equal to the Slayer. The Divinity Machine adorned the Doomslayer with never-before-seen strength and speed of supernatural degrees. The Marine's new gifts would also grant him agelessness and immortality. He would wield the Crucible, unknown to be accessible by any other Sentinel, only to a true warrior king. He could rip apart the mightiest of Titans with his bare hands. His strength would allow him to render even gods lifeless. This newfound power was unlimited, but he'd only be granted access to it because these features were simply matched to his will, his greatest weapon. The Doomslayer lives for his unfathomable rage and hatred for the demons, his true enemy. The more he kills, the stronger he gets, as he absorbs the power of his victims. Hell itself would cower from his undying ferocity. His anger is forever growing, and the essence within him always matches his potential to his will. He is as strong as his motive, as devastating as he needs to be for the given threat. His lust for violence and vengeance against his enemy would provide an undying fuel. Being able to conquer even death itself, the Slayer would only become subdued through entrapment, as seen with his entombment from the Bloodkeep. He would be the dominant life form of the universe and become the savior across realms. The origin of the Divinity Machine and the knowledge of its power were slowly unraveled throughout the series. An early idea removed from Eternal suggested that the machine's transfusion of the Doomslayer was known as something called the Slayer Ritual, but it was removed as it was an early story concept that was taken on a different path.
It was blasphemy for you to be granted access to the Slayer Ritual.
There can only ever be one Slayer, and he must be worthy. Chosen by the Khan Maker herself.
Also in Eternal, it was originally thought to be not just Maker energy, but the Father's essence that powered the machine, as it was hinted at many times. Samur mysteriously stole the essence, and sometime around then, submitted the Slayer to the Divinity Machine in defiance to the Khan. It was referenced to put these ideas together. This was further hinted at in multiple alternate voice lines, unused in the game's final release, that claimed the progenitor was somehow tied to the essence of the machine.
It was my blood that made you. The progenitor may have sowed the seed, but it was I who made it possible, not him.
Alternatively, when the Slayer entered Urdak, his bioscan read as the progenitor, which was changed to Seraphim on release.
Welcome, progenitor.
He was even prophesized in the Corax tablets to be the right hand of the Creator. Having the Slayer's power shared with gods was an exciting concept, and explained why he's so powerful, perhaps symbolizing a sort of second coming of Christ. This could have been id's original intention, maybe it was retconned in future DLC. It wasn't until the release of Ancient Gods 2, the chronological finale of the Slayer saga, that most was revealed.
They lied to you, Slayer.
It was explained that the Dark Lord was the true creator of the universe, and the one behind the creation of the Slayer. So, still the power of God, just not the one we thought. While it was the Seraphim that gave the Marine his power, it was the Dark Lord who pulled the strings. It came to be, just as Devoth had ordained, just as he forced, as he won his retribution against the Father. And the heavens were in ruin.
Our gifts were wasted on you.
But he didn't foresee his own destruction. The Slayer set off and faced the Dark Lord at last, but it came at a price. After destroying his true enemy, the Slayer collapsed to the ground, and his connection to Devoth was severed.
By his hand, all things were made. Even you.
While separate entities, they are both primevals, gods and protectors of their given realms. Primevals were of such great strength that each realm could only contain one, which is why the Slayer, possibly even beyond that, is capable of killing the Dark Lord. The Slayer shares this mark of the beast with Devoth because it is his essence that was used in the Divinity Machine. It was the mark of the Primeval. It is only a Primeval, the Slayer, that is capable of containing this power. Although he created the Slayer, Devoth didn't make that original Marine. He was born on his own, but perhaps throughout his life, the Dark Lord has been subtly nudging him towards his destiny. The machine didn't just gift the Slayer with some celestial maker energy, nor with the direct power of the Dark Lord. It granted him access to a potential unknown to him. It always resided within the Slayer, as Devoth knew more about him than he did. Although still a human, he was always a god, which explains his inhuman strength and durability when he was still a mortal. Unlocked by the Dark Lord, his destined rival, the Doomslayer's strengths were matched to his will, his power growing infinite to align with his undying ferocity. While the Slayer's connection to Devoth and the Divinity Machine were severed, he still remains a god. His purpose was finally fulfilled, so he simply rests in the Tomb of Souls until he is needed again. The Dark Ages reveals more of the Slayer's past with the Sentinels. To a time before the Argenta Civil War, the Slayer fights alongside the Sentinels throughout the Unholy War under the control of the Makers, as he was the Makers' responsibility for being blessed with a fragment of what they thought was their power. Throughout the game, the Slayer discovers and further utilizes this very power. We see him use these abilities, granted to him by the Divinity Machine. His strength, his speed, his inhuman and supernatural capabilities are all there. He is shown to be able to directly intake Hell's essence, similar to how he would come to withstand and absorb raw Argent energy. The Marine even wields weapons of godly capacities, such as the Shield Saw, and even the Cosmic Dread Mace, an infinitely dense eldritch weapon that ruins the mind of any mortal user. We feel powerful, and the gameplay really makes that clear to us. But why does he appear so much weaker throughout the story? The Slayer is not weak by any means, at least not in the traditional sense. He simply lacks that high level of durability that he's known for, as the limit of his strength is questionable. Despite the sheer amount of violence he has ever engaged in as a god, the Slayer has never really been known to experience any vulnerabilities until now. He struggles with the Witch's dark magic, he is rendered paralyzed by the Wraiths, and even gets stabbed through his body. We see him bleed for the first time since he's been blessed, and this happens twice. Azrak is one of the only demons, if not the only, that require the Slayer to have multiple encounters with to even kill. But overall, he appeared to be much more susceptible to pain than usual, and honestly, this led some players to believe that this game takes place at a time before the Slayer was blessed. The weaknesses shown in game, along with the fact that the game was advertised as the origin story of the Doomslayer's rage, put that idea in some people's heads. Well, the story and the codex make it very clear that that's not the case. It's fairly obvious that the Slayer is already adorned with his abilities. But still, why does he appear much weaker than usual? And has he truly become a god yet? Well, the game bridges the events from the flashbacks of Eternal to a time before the Argenta Civil War. The Slayer is very unfamiliar to the extent of his strength at this point in the timeline, far from who he will become. He was newly adorned with his might and imprisoned by the Makers shortly after to be used as a vessel for their divine will. This is why the tether system exists. The heaven energy that surges through the Slayer acts as a shock collar as it inflicts intense power and pain. and he is shown to overpower its control multiple times, as he sees that familiar symbol embedded inside of him. The Slayer, while great and mighty, wouldn't be used by gods as the nuclear option superweapon if he was a mere mortal. He was the Khan Maker's most prized asset. The Sentinels so irrationally feared him because they witnessed what he came to possess. Azrak's main goal is even centered around the idea that this newly blessed Slayer is what the demons were afraid of. Azrak's leadership over Hell was threatened by the Slayer because Hell's armies feared the Slayer more than they did their own leader. But if his strength is that notable, why is he experiencing pain more than usual? What happened to the lack of limits for the essence within him? We can once again blame the Makers. Their control of the Slayer disconnected him from reality, halting him from being able to learn his new power.
We purify his mind and leave only his hatred for the demons.
For several hours into the campaign, he was trapped under Maker control. When he finally broke free, his power and his will were finally able to grow. Reconnecting with his mind, he is able to start adjusting to this new power. After he gets his freedom, he spends the rest of the game going through trials, moments of hardship that evoke growth. He overcomes weaknesses and loss through his own death and that of his dragons. The Slayer symbol shown throughout the campaign represents him channeling his essence, getting in touch with that potential deep within. He dies by his own hand, something he was able to achieve because of his will. Only he was able to do this to himself. He ripped out his tether, powered by the Maker energy, intentionally, knowing it will do this. His anger, something that became a weapon unlocked from the Divinity Machine, is what kept him alive. The Doomslayer's physical body died, being left as a rotting corpse in hell, but his spirit and mind remained intact. He saw that familiar symbol from the machine. As his hatred for the demons, his rage, brought him back. He rejected death. Because the Seraphim submitted him to the machine, he is immortal. The only possible way to die is if he commits it himself.
We should kill him. We'll need something more permanent.
I have a video that discusses the symbol and how he channels his rage through it, if you want to check it out. It is when Sarat gets slain, near the end of the game, that the Slayer fully embraces his rage, and his strength allows him his victory, as he finally becomes his true self. That rageful, all-powerful beast that we all know and love. A mortal who is caught in the middle of a struggle bigger than he could ever imagine. The one who was subjugated to and withstood the Divinity Machine, merely a tool to enact Devoth's ultimate revenge, a vengeance that echoed throughout all of creation. The Divinity Machine in Doom serves as one of the most important elements in the overall story, and it was interesting to see its influence on the Slayer at a much earlier point in the timeline. While the origins of its power were once an evolving mystery, one thing has always been consistent. It gave birth to a legend, the true savior of existence, the most powerful entity ever.
And you will crush our enemies and cast down those who lead us astray.
Thanks for watching. It's funny, when I was younger, Doomguy was always my favorite character. He's the most badass character in gaming. He could beat anybody. He's been to hell and back multiple times, even as a normal human. He's doing the Lord's work. So it's funny how he'd come to grow into that image I had of him in the original games. Be sure to check out some of my other videos. I covered multiple topics in the Dark Ages so far, but thanks again for watching.